Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Natalia Drozdiak, and I'm a tech reporter at Bloomberg News here in Brussels. I am honored to introduce Stavros Lambrinidis. He is the EU's ambassador to the US since March 2019. And joining us to discuss EU and US issues and areas of cooperation on digital is Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl. She is Digital Europe's Director General. She is also an advisor to NATO on cybersecurity and emerging technologies, and she's part of the European Commission's working group on AI. So just for transparency, this is not a live discussion. We are recording in advance on February 2nd. And given that the conference is all about pandemic recovery and digital, so I figured we might as well start there. So Stavros and Cecilia, the EU and the US are both, proposing pandemic recovery plans with a big emphasis on digital. I'm wondering, where do you both see common priorities between the EU-US and US plans on those issues?
Thank you, Natalia, and it's great to be here with you and with Cecilia. Indeed, as we're coming out of the pandemic back in Europe, we've had a very big discussion on how we rebuild our economy. Is it going to be an economy close to the past, or is it going to be one that addresses the major challenges of the future? And those challenges, the way we've identified them, for Europe at least, are green and digital. We think that that is the source of a tremendous promise of growth and jobs in Europe. And that is where we're putting our money also, precisely where our mouth is. If you look at the Next Generation EU, the big fund that we have agreed to support the economies of member states to recover. In addition to the EU budget, the new budget, you will see that more than 20% has been dedicated to investments in digital. Because we do not want, as Europe, to be a playfield in digital. We want to be a player in digital. We want to make sure that that we run as fast as anyone else, and where we can even faster. This, however, does not mean, under any circumstances, that the transformation to digital will be possible without extremely close EU-US cooperation. And we have identified that in the proposal, the blueprint that we put out for cooperation with the new administration back in December. Very telegraphically, some of the areas in which we can work on. When you come to artificial intelligence, you have to look at the way that it affects democracy. You have to look at the algorithms. You have to look at disinformation. You have to look at all these things. When it comes to business, whether it is e-commerce or whether it is having clear digital rules for the platforms, including antitrust and other rules, that we feel is going to be a huge success in terms of boosting innovation. Industry doesn't like uncertainty, doesn't like confusion. And so working with the US on looking at these rules is going to be quite important. When it comes to cybersecurity, this is something that we have to work together and work together better than before. But look at trade and tech, also when it relates to green, when it relates to health. I think the pandemic has shown us that there can be remarkable applications of digital, including AI, when it comes to health and when it comes to trade, and working together to look at the international rules there as well as our domestic ones is going to be very important. Speaking of security, what do you do with things like export controls and foreign direct investments when it comes to tech? That's another very big topic. Just to close this initial answer, dual use technologies were easy to figure out in the past. A rocket, it's a dual use technology, right? But what about when it comes down to your refrigerator, where someone can actually look at what you stock it with and what you eat and figure out everything from your health to whether or not you're on vacation and when, to everything else. It gets really complicated and really interesting. It makes a lot of sense for the Americans and the Europeans together to be setting those standards because, in the end of the day, we are aligned as democracies on values. And this debate very much centers around values all the time. How it is that we can ensure that digital is not used by authoritarians setting standards for the rest of the world, but by the two biggest democracies in the world. That's what I think is the promise of the future.
And Cecilia, from the industry perspective, is there, what does the European tech industry hope to see from the government's recovery plans?
I mean, exactly what. First of all, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being so clear on the priorities and the need to work together. I mean, we are standing before this digital decade, right? And the years of data. And I think that EU has taken that responsibility extremely serious for a number of years. And now it seems that finally we also have an administration on the US side that is really reaching out and ready to work to align on digital regulation and policies, but also on investment, of course. And I think that we need to see the combination of what digital can actually do through the investment, that being, for example, as mentioned, the green agenda. It will play a major role in actually achieve the sustainability goals. It will play a major role in also getting the economy back on its feet, that being from the retail business, but also the manufacturing business, and many other businesses are totally dependent on, for example, data. So data availability, but also data security and data privacy will have to, and not least at the moment, data flows, right, being the major challenge we have right now between the US and EU. We will have to work together with US as the Mr. Ambassador rightly said, the two biggest democracies. We will have to work together to align those both the policies and the growth and the reboosting of the economy. And one cannot simply not go with the other. I mean, we are investing heavily in each other's economies. We are totally tangled up in each other's supply chains. So we really need to get that right, as data plays a major role and technology plays a major role actually to get the economy back on its feet.
So, Ambassador, you're based in Washington, of course, and I'm very curious to get your thoughts because much of the world is still somewhat in shock after the attacks on the U.S. Congress earlier in January, and of course the ensuing reaction by the tech platforms to ban Donald Trump. It's really highlighted a different approach between Europe and the US in terms of platform regulation. And I'm wondering, with Biden in power now, how far apart are both sides in actuality on that issue?
Not as far apart as we used to be several years ago, and I want to underline it. And in fact, you saw from the US reactions an understanding which is difficult because of the First Amendment and the history behind it in the United States, that not all speech all the time is okay. And this is something that in Europe we have been discussing for a very long time. And both of us, of course, are the biggest protectors of free speech in the world. So the question comes down to where do you draw the line? Look, democracy is the toughest of all political systems. And it's the toughest one because it requires for its success the participation of every individual citizen in the making of decisions and in the holding into account a democratically elected government. And that requires in itself then information, reliable information, free information to flow upon which citizens can make decisions. Disinformation, in other words, the deliberate attempt to lie to people and to use big platforms and algorithms that don't necessarily involve any human interaction, but are based on who gets the biggest clicks, the more clicks, which usually tends to be the most extreme speech, brought into light the fact that we have a real challenge in our democracies. So I would say that we have to look at hate speech together, and we have to address that issue. Where do you draw the lines to that? And we have to do that as we have in Europe together with business as well. we have put together a number of conversations involving business, including from the United States, to look at what the correct use of artificial intelligence should be. And we came out with both a white paper on artificial intelligence, which is a discussion paper where you go to the future, and also an expert group, including, like I said, U.S. companies. What do we do with this information? So not just incitement to violence, which is hate speech and which is illegal under EU law and under international law, but also that use of the internet to deliberately try to divide people and to put them into different, containers of isolated information, living in their own bubbles. What do you do with that? What do you do with privacy? We saw how data can be misused. In the US, Cambridge Analytica was perhaps a pivotal case that brought to the forefront of the US as well the importance of being able to ensure privacy, as we are at the same time ensuring free data flows and innovation that comes with them. So none of these are easy issues. We have tried to address them in Europe in the Digital Services Act that we unfolded, in the Digital Markets Act that looks at the responsibilities of big platforms and the effort to spur innovation on the basis of democratic values. And these are areas where I look forward to discussing with the United States very closely in the next months. We have to do this together if we can.
Yeah, I know this is an area that the Commission wants to work closely with the U.S. on, alongside the EU-U.S. Trade and Technology Council that they're proposing. Cecilia, I'm curious, from the industry perspective, what opportunities do you see as part of that technology council? And Ambassador, how does this fit into the EU's strategy of technological sovereignty in Europe?
I mean, of course, this poses a great opportunity. I mean, we have been working with, for example, Japan very closely for years on digital policy alignment and investment alignment, and somehow that has gone a little bit missing in the last 5 years. And reviving that dialogue with US is absolutely vital, and that being on DSA. I mean, industry totally agrees that legal clarity here is extremely important, and that we should have as harmonized rules as possible. And I think the EU has shown great leadership, but it takes two to tango, and it really needs to be an area of discussion. Also, artificial intelligence, data flows, as we said right now, is concrete. There are differences in surveillance laws and others, and it's not easy things to solve. But the dialogue has to start, because in the end, we are all losers if we cannot transfer data across borders. We know that 90% of all European companies actually has data flows with the US, and nearly, or 90% have data flows, and 75% of them has flows to the US. So I mean, it's hampering both the European and the EU and the US economy if we don't get this problem fixed. And we need to start the dialogues on this as soon as possible, as one of the most urgent things we should do. Those are not easy things. Standardization systems for technology. And of course, then there is cybersecurity, which is both cybersecurity in daily lives for individuals, but also more linked to national security, etc. There are agendas on cybersecurity, which is, like the ambassador said, the two worlds are floating, into each other as, criminals are basically entering also the private sphere through technology to individuals. So there are a lot of things at stake, and no doubt that we need to work very closely. And industry has a great role to play here, because most of the knowledge, a large share of the knowledge on how to handle technologies, how to make the standards, how to make the regulations, will come out of private sector, and we take that extremely serious, that we sit upon a knowledge in our sector that needs to be shared with policymakers, and that we must play our role in this also.
Thanks, and let me say thanks, Cecilia. I agree, and And I would focus in particular on artificial intelligence in the future. Look, the world is going to be an AI world, and right now the standards are being set. We absolutely are not looking for a isolation of Europe or of European data from the world. Quite the opposite. We understand supremely well how if for us to excel in digital, and as I said before, we want to be a digital player. There's got to be a free flow of data, and that goes for innovation as well. But when it comes to something like AI, right now others are setting standards for us. Frankly, we have, as Tony Blinken said in his hearing, recently, you have techno democracies and techno autocracies out there, and it's going to be very important to be able to ensure that as AI unfolds, we are the ones that make it human-centric, that make it based on democratic values, that ensure that companies, consumers, simple individuals benefit from it, that we ensure that it's not discriminatory, and we certainly ensure that it's not being used to observe and repress people as opposed to free them. And so this will be a major thing. The Tech and Trade Council that you mentioned is a major priority of ours. It's something we were discussing with the previous administration, and we are set to discuss immediately with the new administration. Everything from cybersecurity to platform responsibilities, to looking at the topics of export controls and coordinating foreign direct investment screenings. All that stuff can and should be discussed in there, and I very much look forward to that.
Well, Ambassador, you touched on the AI, the discussion and the priorities of the Commission to pursue ethical development of AI. I'm wondering, what is your sense from Washington? Is there any chance that they might follow Brussels in terms of proposing legislation there? And Cecilia, I mean, what are your thoughts from the industry perspective? If they don't, what impact will this have on European tech industry if there's diverging approaches, even if the values might be aligned? Yeah.
Well, thanks, Natalia. I would say that there is, we have a tremendous opportunity here when it comes to AI because both the EU and the US have very similar thinking on what constitutes trustworthy AI. And that's supremely important when you think about standards for AI. And we both recognize the risks that a very small fraction of high-risk applications, whether it's healthcare or financial, there are a few of them, the risks that can be posed to consumers and the need to think about setting regulatory guardrails to those. So I am very much looking forward to that kind of discussion, and I'm happy to see, as well as in the White House, the position of Office of Science and Technology has been elevated to a cabinet level. I think that's going to be it's also a signal from the Biden administration of an interest to work on those matters. So I see an opportunity there that cannot be missed, because as we are not talking to each other, or as long as we are not talking to each other as much as we can, as I said before, others will be setting the standards for us.
Yeah, so on that I cannot disagree at all. And I would say, I mean, the consequences, you say what would happen if we don't align? I mean, it will have serious consequences for the economy, for example, on the data flows. If we look on artificial intelligence and privacy, I mean, even on privacy, we still have to harmonize, or we still have to align the rule sets. And I think that you have had a delay in Washington compared to EU on privacy on these topics, no doubt. But it's better a bit late than never, and it is still early. Remember, I mean, 10 years ago we just started talking about GDPR. Many companies in private sector had no idea what GDPR was, when it was implemented even. So it is the price of being a first mover that you have to sometimes give some time for things to fall in place. And I'm a big believer that in democracy the right things will be eventually be discussed, and I do believe that this GDPR and the dialogue on how to harmonize privacy rules, data flows rules, artificial intelligence rules, and not least, for example, on the platforms. I mean, these digital technologies, they don't have any borders. They don't really mind where they go. And I would say, hopefully, the US will be the start. We have to remember that in our democracy, you cannot discriminate. You cannot do all the bad things that you can in other places. And we cannot also leave the rest of the world behind. And it is extremely important to have a dialogue also on the role of the platforms in non-democracies. They are giving access to a lot of knowledge that people would never have. They are giving access to a dialogue of democracy that would not take place without these. And this is something we need to remind ourselves, even in Europe, where we have had countries that were not democracies some time ago, that it is extremely important that these rules of non-discrimination, of freedom of speech are kept, alive across other nations too, not only US and EU.
So Cecilia, you've really emphasized, how important data flows are to both the EU and US economies, and obviously this has been a point of contention between both sides of the Atlantic for many years, especially around the issues of privacy and the Schrems ruling. I'm wondering, where do you both see the US moving forward on the issue of data flows after this most recent Schrems 2 ruling? And is there scope for collaboration, for discussions between the EU and the US in terms of lawful access to data for national security purposes?
Do you want me to jump in? I'll tell you very quickly. It's a critical question. So there really is not major disagreement between the EU and the US when it comes to the importance of sharing data safely. And in Europe, we believe that data should be transferred all over the world, but protections of that data should transfer with them as well. Now, what happened is that, as you mentioned, the European Court of Justice came out with the decision, the Schrems 2 decision, that invalidated the major piece of agreement that we had between us for the free flow of data between companies. And this is something that we take very seriously, as the US does as well, ensuring that Supreme Court decisions are fully applied. So we jumped immediately with the US administration, the previous one, and ready to do immediately so with the new one, to try to find ways to apply the court decision and to ensure the free flow. Now, keep in mind the flow of data is happening. It hasn't stopped. What the Privacy Shield was in a sense a conformity assessment decision by the EU that we don't have with other countries. It's precisely because with the US we share these values and these interests. It was a highway that we built for the really fast exchange of data. Now, after this was invalidated, we still can and do exchange data. It's just cannot be a highway. It happens through the other roads we have in place, but we want to return to the highway. So we are working with the US counterparts, and we also rely on their knowledge and expertise of US law. What needs to be changed in US law to ensure that if in fact there's a need for law changes, in addition to administrative or other changes, to ensure that we can be in full compliance and return to a new, if you like, trend. So right now, there are standard contractual clauses people can use, and they're being updated to exchange data. There's guidance by the European Data Protection Board. But, again, when you look at this decision, it focuses primarily on the access by national security agencies to data. It's a big debate we're having back in Europe as well. It's the issues of proportionality, of necessity, of what is appropriate in a democratic society. Basically, the same test in the EU and the US law to look at those matters. Do I think there's a prospect for More discussions, absolutely. They've been happening. They will be happening, and I hope that we come to a resolution, not just quickly, but also a resolution that is firm this time. We cannot afford a Schrems 3 and a Schrems 4 and a Schrems 5. We want to be able to just get to a point that this happens. Let me close by saying, would a federal American data protection law like the GDPR in Europe help in this process? The answer is absolutely. It's not the silver bullet, but absolutely it would. Um, the US is facing the same issues on privacy that we were facing on data protection we were facing a few years back in Europe. Companies do not want to have 27 EU member states having their own laws on how you can retain and how you can use data. That would be devastating for the way that companies, especially companies in today's borderless world, do business. So we came with GDPR. I was one of the first people, even at the European Parliament when I was at the time, working on privacy issues. Not that popular back then, but it became very clear, and companies embraced it, and companies see the benefits for their business as well in having clear rules on privacy, because those allow then for the highways for innovation while protecting value. So I know there's a discussion in the U.S. as well. Different states are coming up with different data protection laws. I do not know if there's going to be a federal law coming in. I know there are a number of proposals. But if that happens, and there's a lot of EU expertise that we are very happy to share from our own internal debates on this, that would be a very important step.
Thank you. Let me also comment on that. I would say, as I said, 90% of companies in the EU transfer data, and 75% of them are actually transferring to the US, and this needs to be solved. And maybe there is a two-step process here. First of all, right now we're waiting for the final interpretation of the Data Protection Authorities Protection Board on how to interpret the ruling on the Schrems case. And here there is actually an opening that which is called additional measures. So if the companies take additional measures, and there is, of course, this is where it gets difficult, but we need that interpretation to allow for data flow that are very sensitive to continue, and for companies to continue their business in parallel with the second step process, where exactly like the ambassador actually points out, there are differences in surveillance laws and etc. And it needs to be discussed. It's not, I know it's sensitive, but it's not, I mean, just because things are sensitive, it cannot be left unsaid. And these are, if we want to collaborate seriously on the digital investment and digital policy agenda, I mean, the privacy differences, the data flow differences are at the heart of moving that forward. And we don't hear you.
After many months, it still happens. Thank you both so much for this lively discussion. I think we have time for one very last question, if that's okay. China, I mean, this is such a big topic for Biden going forward, and you know, I'm curious whether the EU and the US can actually devise a common strategy there, and what impact will this have on the European tech sector? I mean, we know that they've been hit by US policies, by Trump's policies, for instance, on Huawei. So where do you both see that going forward?
I would say the following when it comes to China. In my view, we have to do two things. We have to run faster than China, and then we have to protect the runners. By this, I mean that obviously, when it comes to digital sphere, there's a tremendous amount of innovation, including in AI and elsewhere. And Americans and Europeans have been historically and today the innovation hubs of the world. Our freedom, our education, our values have contributed massively to innovation. And this is precisely what ought to be done in AI and in digital. But we need to be able to have the tools out there to incentivize, to support that kind of transformation on both sides of the Atlantic. In addition to, I hope, having our companies and our and our governments talking to each other to deal with issues of fruitful cooperation for innovation and also fruitful cooperation for the innovation in regulation that is going to be required. Now, at the same time, I said, you need to protect the runners. China has been using unfair trade practices right and left, whether it is IP theft or whether it is forced technology transfers or whether it is massively subsidizing its own industries with cheap money and therefore unfairly competing with us, or whether it is shutting off its market or making it extremely unprofitable for people to invest in. And these are the kind of issues of protecting the runners, protecting the investments that we make, that I think also Americans and Europeans are supremely interested in talking about. Absolutely, there can be cooperation. It has to be based on our hardcore interests, economic and other interests, and it also has to be based on our values. And in both cases, we are free, open economies, fair economies in the world. And I think that if we manage to get this right, we're going to be okay.
And yeah, just filling in and saying, I mean, reciprocity in any kind of relation is, I think, must be always a given. And as the Mr. Ambassador points out, I mean, US and Europe are open economies, and hopefully for many decades will remain to be an open economy. And of course, reciprocity also with China will be key. You cannot compete if the terms are not equal, and hopefully this is what we're working towards, I would say, and working together also, of course, with WTO, international trade bodies, to align those rules and markets will be absolutely key for US and for EU. So I think it's about stepping up to the task of making sure that the rules of the game and a rule-based trade system is restored, and really dragging that into the right direction, and then reminding our partners in the East that reciprocity is something that we all aim towards, no matter where we are.
And I would add, Cecilia, absolutely, I would add fairness as well. We have to work with the WTO. We have a trilateral coordination now, Japan, US, EU, to deal with changing some of the rules that need to be changed to deal with the unfair practices, subsidizations. But we have to keep some unilateral tools in place. We have on 5G that Natalia mentioned, we have a toolkit in the EU to ensure that our member states take into account, and they have been in the past months, very seriously, the risks coming of 5G investments by companies that are not safe, and by companies that may be controlled by countries and by governors that do not believe in freedoms. We are looking at ensuring that public procurement in Europe cannot be flooded by unfairly subsidized companies around the world. And of course, we have foreign direct investment screening in place, the equivalent of CFIUS here in the United States, and other issues. So absolutely, we can work with the US to ensure the level playing field, as Cecilia mentioned, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Well, between data flows, AI, platform regulation, China, and many other things, it's clear that the digital space will be an exciting one to watch as the EU and US try to revive their relations. So thank you both so much for this very interesting discussion, and it's been great time spent with you both.
Thank you. And I know I do have a name as well. It's Stavros. I understand it's difficult to pronounce, so you do the Mr. Ambassador business, which is great. But I apologize. I apologize for not calling you your official titles. But thank you for using mine.
Take care. Have a great evening. Bye.